Hello and welcome to Four Random Books, Episode 5. We're looking at destroyers this time. And I'm going to start off with one of my favourite destroyer books, Pursuit by Ludovic Kennedy. It's got a lovely, lovely, cool map at the beginning, inside the cover. This is my very battered version, which I picked up a few years ago and probably looked less battered then, but it's been read a lot, it's been travelled around in books, in bags a lot, and used a lot, so yes. Whoa. This is a comfy book and a comfy place to read. It's kind of interesting because he starts off Sub-Lieutenant as his first book, and then he does Nelson's Band of Brothers and One Man's Meat, Murder Story, Rillington Place, The Trial of Stephen Ward, and very lovely people, and finally gets to Pursuit, The Chase and Sinking of the Bismarck. And it's dedicated for my friend and former tutor, David Cecil, this tale of unquiet lives with gratitude and affection. And he starts off with this quote, "My subject is war and the pity of war, Wilfred I." This is a book written by a man who lost his father serving in the Royal Navy as a captain in World War II, in charge of a merchant cruiser, and who himself served throughout the war as a sub-lieutenant and a lieutenant, including aboard HMS Tartar during the pursuit of the Bismarck. He has a first-hand account on the war. He has real experience and real blood in the game, so when he writes, it is worthwhile to listen about what he writes and what he says. The operations room of the British Admiralty was situated in a large, new, ugly concrete building called the Citadel, adjacent to the old Admiralty building in Whitehall, London, close by the War Office and Nelson's Column in Trafalgar Square, and just up the road from Downing Street and the Houses of Parliament. This was the heart and centre of the whole British naval war effort. There was a big map of the world on one wall, one of the Atlantic on another, and pins and flags showed the constantly shifting positions of our warships and convoys, as well as enemy surface craft and U-boats, sighted by aircraft or fixed by intelligence or radio direction finding. It was to this room that Tovey spoke on the green telephone from his flagship at Scapa. It was here that information and intelligence of all kinds, from ships, shore establishments, embassies, monitoring posts, and agents all over the world flowed in. From here that operational instructions, commands, advice, and situation reports to ships at sea went out. It was manned by 15 or 20 officers and men who, ever since receiving Captain Dingham's signal of Bismarck's departure, had been at full stretch. The officers were most concerned with important decisions of this time were Captain Edwards, Director of Operations, Captain Daniel, Director of Plans, Rear Admiral Clayton, Commander Denning, Lieutenant Commander Kemp of Naval Intelligence. Above them in naval hierarchy were Rear Admiral Power, Assistant Chief of Naval Staff, Vice Admiral Sir Tom Phillips, Vice Admiral of the Naval Staff, and Head of the Navy, Admiral of the Fleet Sir Dudley Pound, First Sea Lord. An important operational signal going out from the Admiralty to the fleet at sea either originated from Pound or else had his approval. Of all the admirals involved in the Bismarck operation, it was Dudley Pound about whom opinion was most divided. He had had a distinguished career, being flag captain of the battleship Colossus at Jutland, but was now a sick man, had only become First Sea Lord because other more senior officers had been even iller than himself. He had a tumour of the brain that was eventually to kill him, also a disease of the hip that caused him pain and insomnia. Before the war, when Commander-in-Chief Mediterranean, he was sometimes to be seen pacing the deck of the flagship in the dead hours of the night. The fleet medical officer thought him unfit to command in time of war, but couldn't bring himself to tell the Admiralty. He was not really fit to be a wartime First Sea Lord, with all the strains of office. Pain and loss of sleep at night meant that he sometimes dozed off at daytime meetings, but he was flattered by the Prime Minister's trust in him, and Churchill liked him because he was often amenable to his wishes. It's a naval officer's account of the war. perhaps retrospectively. Remember, he was a member of Parliament for the Liberals. But he's a good man, a good historian, a good person. This is a destroyer-themed though. He was aboard HMS Tartar. And this is Donald Macintyre's book on Narvik. This is one of those gorgeous little books. It's produced in 1959, although this version is published in 1962, and pretty much its purpose of this book is not to learn the lessons of the victories at the end of the war, but to make sure we understand the mistakes at the beginning, or as His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh put it in 1953, there will always be a strong tendency to assume that any future war will start where the last one left off. We should learn our lessons from what went wrong at the beginning of the last war, and not from what went right at the end of it. Imagine how different the world would be if there were more books and more people who had that conversation about learning lessons from what went wrong at the beginning of the last war, not what was going right at the end. When you managed to build everything and learn your way around war again, when you've managed to understand it. And this book is all about that. This book is full of the lessons of Narvik and Glowworm, dealing with Stuckers, HMS Bittern being on fire, Carton de Weert, HMS Punjabi after heavy German attack en route to Narvik. A German destroyer scuttled in Rombach's Ford. German vessels ablaze in Narvik after British shelling. Basically, this picture is taken after HMS Cossack busted through some blockade ships, jumped into the harbour, and basically, while perched on top of a block ship, did a "Here's Johnny" impression, and proceeded to destroy everything in sight. Trapper-class destroyers are like that. They pretty much consider anything that's a target to be sinkable. The most recent example had been at the Dardanelles during Churchill's ill-starred Gallipoli adventure in the First World War. Battleships had on that occasion failed to force the Straits in face of shore fortifications and minefields. The Navy had been almost unanimous in condemning the attempt. An exception had been Roger Keyes, who had been Chief of Staff to the Commanding Admiral, and who passionately believed that the attempt had been abandoned just when victory was in sight. Subsequently, Keyes had gained great renown for his leadership of the raid at Zeebrugge. Now he was Admiral of the fleet, Sir Roger Keyes, and was at the First Lord's elbow, urging an operation which had much in common with that in the Dardanelles. Admirals of the fleet are always on the active list, and gallant Keyes was burning to lead a squadron against Trondheim. Another of the fleet, Lord Cork, had already been given command of the expedition to Narvik, so that it would create no new precedent if Keyes, greatly senior to Sir Charles Forbes, was also to fly his flag in a ship of the home fleet. This is the trouble when your peacetime command is admirals and you have the admirals of the fleet going, "We'd really like to go to war. We really would. There is so much we could do now." Again, get rid of Keyes. Send him off to Supreme Commander in the Far East to sort out all that problems. Make history so much better, so much more palatable. Thankfully, there were some calming heads, but not too many, and this is a great book. But disturbingly enough, not my favourite about Narvik. My favourite about Narvik is this one. Attack at Dawn by Ron Cope. It is possibly the least academic book I have read on the subject, and honestly, this book is not intended to mislead readers into thinking it is a serious work of naval history. I leave that to those with far more professional abilities than I would claim to have. However, I believe it should be considered as being the first definitive record of accounts from those who were actually involved in the First Battle of Narvik. It comprises their own experiences regarding how they managed to survive after the battle and also escaped capture by the enemy. I cannot vouch that all accounts are fully factual, although from the sheer volume that I've been able to gather, there must be a lot of truth. However, I can definitely confirm the crew members of the second destroyer fleet were there, and during the ensuing years were still able to describe what they had witnessed. In addition, I have had to accept the information that has been provided by the crew members' families and friends, passed on either verbally or recorded on paper or tape, is indeed true and correct. As a mark of respect to Norwegian people, I would like to point out on the front cover, although I've written the phrase First Battle of Narvik, in actual fact, the first battle took place the day before. This was the 9th of April 1940, when the German Navy arrived and was confronted by two First World War Norwegian coastal defence ships, Einsvold and Norvik. The Norwegian captains having stood their ground, the two ships were eventually torpedoed and sunk in the fjord. This report resulted in 282 Norwegian sailors losing their lives. However, during the rest of the book, I refer to the First Battle of Narvik as happening on 10th April 1940. I have had similar issues with my book. It's a similar test. This book is beautiful to read and is a really great account of what was a very hectic and hard-going battle. George Duff Bailey rightly felt their job had been done. Number 2 gun turned its fire on a howitzer on the foreshore, which was worrying us. A few rounds finished that one off. We fired on the remaining merchant ships as we came around and scored hits on them, then came out of the harbour a second and last time as we fought. Having come back out of the harbour after the second attack, you cannot blame the relatively young officers flushed with success from feeling invincible. However, it was now time to take stock of the situation to allow Captain Warburton Lee to make an informed decision. Once more, as on the occasion of entering the fjord the day before, there were discussions of his officers. Stanning again seems to be more specific about how decisions to re-enter or not was decided. Probably this was because it was one of his responsibilities on behalf of the captain to take notes as an official record of battle events. However, there appears to be an unreliability of accounts after such a fast-paced adrenaline-fueled event, when the memory is never 100% efficient. Standing in his account writes, Wash then said that he thought perhaps we ought to withdraw and asked us what we thought. The answer was unanimously in favour of going in again, and for the following reasons. 1. We did not know the damage we had done, nor what forces of the enemy were left. As all guns had ceased firing very early in the second attack, it was possible that all the opposition had been silent. It would be ridiculous to withdraw in the face of no opposition at all, and if there were any enemy forces left, we ought to try and estimate their weight and report it. Same time, Wash was anxious that no one should get torpedoed, but it was pointed out that so many torpedoes had been fired us already that there could not be that many more to fire. Hostile had fired no torpedoes at all so far, and Wash wanted to let her have a turn. Seems fair. It's a good book to read. Attack at Dawn by Ron Cope. I talk a lot about the tribal class destroyers and what is the second/third battle of Narvik. That's the first battle of Narvik. Well, first/second. Critical Conflict: The Royal Navy's Mediterranean Campaign, 1940, by Peter C. Smith. Now, I'm going to go into this one quickly because it's a Peter Smith book, and it is good. It has lovely quotes, and this is one of my favourites. I witnessed further trials. Somerville visited installation and reported on it as follows. I've witnessed further trials of the Type 79 RDF set on shore and found that a punctured condenser had been the cause of poor operation in previous trials. The set now gives reasonably good indication of range up to 40 or 50 miles, but the prevalence of land echoes makes it very difficult to obtain accurate bearings. As a means of medium-distance warning of approach, the set now serves a useful purpose, but does not enable a long-distance plot to be obtained. It appears that either a set with a short wavelength or else large aerial arrays will be required to deal with the difficult local conditions for RDF. The Type 79Z rail was a naval radar developed as a long-range warning set against enemy aircraft of 15 to 20 kilowatts with a 7-meter wavelength. The set was first fitted in the light cruiser Sheffield in August 1938, and soon afterwards in the battleship Rodney. With it, an aircraft could be detected at 10,000 feet at a range of 53 miles. In the middle of 1939, the set's power was increased up to 90 kilowatts, giving 60 miles of range. Trials took place just before the war, and 40 sets were ordered. Delivery of the first set first commencing in 1940 and Gibraltar receiving one of the first. Despite the gloomy report of Somerville, the set performed well enough to be handed over to the military authorities in September, played a large part in subsequent Vichy bombing raids, although it is never mentioned in accounts of this period. Somerville also commented in the same report on the low efficiency of both Army AA batteries and searchlight positions, putting this down in part to the fact that the fleet had been away, giving no scope for further training exercises. It's an interesting book, and it's got some great quotes in it, and Peter Smith does his usual job. I don't always agree with everything he says, but this is well written, this book. Anyway, I'm well over the 15-minute mark, so thank you. I'm going to stop this there, and hope you've enjoyed.